Hello everybody, how are you doing? Welcome to the stream. Tonight, of course, we are about to record podcast. I'm sorry I'm late. I'm more than an hour late. I was some scheduling with private stuff here with the wife, and then I was actually procrastinating in Halifa's stream. That also wasn't helping. So yeah. But now I'm here, and I'm about to do this. Where's the? Yeah, that's where we want to go. Delete all this shit. All right. Blam, blam. Hello. Why? What? Whoa. Okay. Now it's working. That's weird. Did I push? Oh, who cares? Probably did something wrong. There. Anyway, here we go. That looks good. 1, 2, 3. Whoa. Okay. Now it's working. That's weird. Did I push? Oh, who cares? Probably did something wrong. There. Anyway, here we go. All right. That looks good. That looks 1, 2, 1, 2. Wait. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Leveling 1, 2, 1, 2. Wow. Whoa. Okay, that's better. Rightio. I'm ready. I think we can do this. Shall we do this? Let's do this. Let's record this show. Turn the light on here. Okay. Thanks for being here. Let's record a podcast, shall we? Okay. You're listening to the Private Citizen podcast. Blah, blah. Somehow I can't talk. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. Let's do this again. You're listening to The Private Citizen, a podcast for critical thinkers. This is episode 149 for Tuesday, the 28th of March, 2023. The Nord Stream cover-up. Hello everybody, my name is Fab. I'm your host. I'm coming to you live from Düsseldorf in Germany, where apparently it's my 9th wedding anniversary today. Earlier the wife came home and told me a bit cheekily. I completely forgot. We don't celebrate. Our wedding anniversary for us getting married was more of a pro forma thing. We celebrate the day we got together, which is, that was 21 years ago. That's much longer. But anyway, so yeah, it's not really special day, but I thought that was kind of funny. welcome to the show. Streaming this live as usual on a Tuesday. I'm hoping to get another episode out tomorrow. I will give my best and can't promise anything. It's still the same story, but I'm trying. So my schedule's all over the place. But on this episode, we will follow up the previous episode and talk about Nord Stream again. More specifically, the Seymour Hersh story that I'd also talked about, in the previous episode. And yeah, that's our topic for today. But before we get into that, I have to apologize. Speaking of the previous episode, I completely fucked up releasing that. I fucked up, and then in trying to fix it, I fucked up again. So if you got the older episode instead of the current one, like you basically got 147 twice. And this didn't occur to you. If you delete that, you should get the real one, the 148. I'm sorry about that. That was just me being an idiot. I apologize. Please excuse my stupidity because on this. And then in other news, if you go to the show notes at privatecitizen.press, in this case privatecitizen.press/episode/149, you will find, if you scroll down to the bottom of the show notes, this will now happen for all episodes. If you scroll down to the bottom, I've embedded the forum thread that belongs to this episode. I have a forum at forum.fab.industries, and we discuss the episodes there. And so I've embedded that in the show notes, so you can also comment directly on episodes now if you scroll down to the bottom of the page. There, of course, all the other ways to contact me still work. If you just want to send me an email, that works. I just thought that was nice. I tried that out with my blog earlier, and then I thought I should also do that for the podcast. So I hope that's something that that you like. And if you don't, just ignore it, I guess. With that, let's get going here. Let's get into. I can find the button I'm trying to press it. Let's get into the topic at hand here. So first, a very quick recap. You should really listen to the previous episode, 148, before you listen to this, because this is this all pertains to the previous episode. But in case you don't want to, just a very quick recap. So last episode I talked about Seymour Hersh, who is a very well-known and accomplished investigative journalist who kind of came out of retirement to write a story about the attack on Nord Stream, on the Nord Stream pipelines, which we kind of speculated on the show about as well. And his theory, based on an anonymous source within the so-called intelligence community, is that the U.S. Navy blew up the pipelines under cover of the Belt Ops 22 exercise, the NATO exercise, and that this was planned by the CIA but carried out by the U.S. Navy and signed off, and not only signed off but also requested, like the whole planning was requested by President Biden. I think I'd said Obama on the show, and I also put that in the show notes, at least one. I don't know. My brain was misfiring last week. I'm sorry about that. Of course, it was President Biden. Now, Hersh published a story, and I talked about on the previous episode how that was not really covered, especially not in the US. There was a little bit of coverage in Germany, but generally it wasn't really picked up. And we also talked shortly about like there was like an alternative theory of, you know, some people renting a yacht in Germany, I think in Kiel, and then they being tied to the Ukrainians apparently, and then blowing up the pipeline, and how that wasn't really very plausible, including like lots of experts who know what they're talking about when it comes to diving, saying that you can't really, at a depth of 80 meters, diving down there, it's not that easy. It's not like, you know, it's not like diving on the Great Barrier Reef, right? You don't just put on, oxygen tanks and just dive down. It's a complex procedure. I think you need to breathe helinox, I think, or a comparable gas mixture. So it's, you need decompression and all that kind of stuff. And that basically you can't do that from that kind of boat. Also, it just like didn't really sound plausible. And the newspapers writing about this kind of also already put kind of caveats into their story. Now, Seymour Hersh published, I think on the day I recorded at least the previous episode. No, I think on the day I released it. I recorded that one early, I think. Yeah, I'd pre-recorded that. So, yeah. Sorry, I've been doing. My schedule is all over the place. I can't really remember. Anyway, I didn't have that. I didn't have his story when I recorded that podcast. Now he's published a second story where he alleges that this was a cover story, a false flag planted by the CIA to discredit his story. So I want to get into that. I just want to address, because, I've talked to some people about the previous episode and had some comments that, are not on the record here that I won't quote, but basically some people saying that the Hersh story is very unbelievable. I personally don't think so. I think from the beginning it was very plausible. It's just, as I said on that episode, the sourcing is just not good. It's like one anonymous source. Now, it's not worse than a lot of the usual New York Times, Washington Post stories on other topics, from the opposite side of the political spectrum, where they just have the same sourcing, where I kind of attack that sourcing as well. So I'm not happy with the sourcing on the story. But sometimes, that's all you can get. And it is also very plausible. But you don't know. Like it could be completely like made up. It could be like a bullshit story from Hersh. What doesn't make me think so, though, is not so much the story, but the behavior I've noticed with my colleagues in the press, and also the officials involved, not addressing this at all, right? Like from the side of the officials, if it was so, it's really hard to disprove something, right? To say that you didn't do something. But like if there was a better theory, you'd think, the US with all the intelligence services could have, like if it was the Russians, for example, right? You'd think they would have at least advanced some traces of that, or like, they kind of have now with this Ukrainian story, but like you'd think they come up with a better story. But, with intelligence services, they might not talk about it. So, you don't know either. But like what weighs more heavy for me is the press, because there's lots of journalists attacking this story, but they haven't done any research where they said, okay, this is why Hersh's story is not plausible, or the research they have done, like the site story and the New York Times story we're going to talk about in this episode, they're just ridiculous. And like even in the very story, they have like disclaimers. They're just not very good. So to me, I'm not saying that this definitely happened, like Hersh said. I'm just saying that he has the best theory at this point. There's been another attacker that's always advanced against anything really that's people don't like these days. They said it's a conspiracy theory. It is a conspiracy theory. It is that. But by virtue of the fact that it is a story or it is a theory about intelligence services doing a clandestine operation, of course it's a conspiracy theory. Any theory about an intelligence service is inherently a conspiracy theory, or almost all of them, or at least the theories about what they do, because that's what intelligence services do, right? That's what they deal in conspiracies. I mean, an intelligence service by itself is a conspiracy. It's a relatively small group of people that does secret shit. In any other context, it would be called a secret society or something like that, except it's like state-sponsored. So yeah, it is a conspiracy theory, but I don't think, that inherently doesn't mean anything, at least in this context. So let's talk about this second story that Hersh published. So he says, he makes a very good point at the beginning, which I also think it's I hadn't even thought about this, but this is a very good point. Hersh writes, press aides for the White House and Central Intelligence Agency have consistently denied that America was responsible for exploding the pipelines, and those pro forma denials were more than enough for the White House press corps. There's no evidence that any reporter assigned there has yet to ask the White House press secretary whether Biden had done what any serious leader would do. Formally, air quotes, task the American intelligence community to conduct a deep investigation with all of its assets and find out who had done the deed in the Baltic Sea. According to a source within the intelligence community, the president has not done so, nor will he. Why not? Because he knows the answer. So that, is a good point. Like, why, if there's a controversy, why hasn't the American government officially gone, we will investigate this with all our resources? Instead, they, like the press, who haven't really investigated either, are just treating it as a mystery. Oh, it's just this mystery. Yeah. So I thought that was a good point. Now, then he brings something up. So Hersh starts the story with basically alleging that the German government at its highest level is complicit in this, what he calls as a cover-up operation of his story. He writes, in early March, President Biden hosted German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Washington. The trip included only two public events, a brief pro forma exchange of compliments between Biden and Scholz before the White House press corps with no questions allowed. I love this, by the way, when they do stuff like this before the press and there's no questions allowed. Like, what's even the point of going there? I've never understood this as a journalist. Anyway, and a CNN interview with Scholz by Fareed Zakaria, who did not touch on the pipeline allegations. Of course not. He'd actually be doing his job. The Chancellor had flown to Washington with no members of the German press on board. I don't think that is actually that special. I think they do that quite a lot. I don't think the German, we don't do that as much as the US having like all the press on the plane. But okay. It's also a much smaller plane. Although Merkel got a new plane. So Scholz has that plane also. He has a bigger plane now, but it was Merkel had a really old plane before that one that actually nearly crashed several times, so they had to replace it. The Chancellor had flown to Washington with no members of the German press on board, no formal dinner scheduled, and the two world leaders were not slated to conduct a press conference, as routinely happens at such high-profile meetings, probably because they weren't saying what they were meeting about, I guess. Instead, it was later reported that Biden and Scholz had an 18-minute meeting with no aides present for much of the time. There have been no statements or written understandings made public since then by either government, but I was told by someone with access to diplomatic intelligence that there was a discussion of the pipeline expose, so Hersh's story, and as a result, certain elements in the Central Intelligence Agency were asked to prepare a cover story in collaboration with German intelligence that would provide the American and German press with an alternative version for the destruction of Nord Stream 2. So, small point here. I don't know what intelligence service that would be. I don't think it would be the BND, really, because they're kind of like our CIA. Or maybe the CIA did the German story and the BND did the American story, so they can kind of swap, kind of like this, the Germans spy on the Americans spy on the Germans, and then they just swap the data so that they don't fall afoul of like the mandate that they can't spy on their own citizens. I guess, because otherwise would it be the Verfassungsschutz, our internal, like the Constitution Protection Service, as it's called, which would be hilarious, because I think if this is right, if Hersh is correct on this, then I am pretty sure this would be against the German Constitution. I'm pretty sure the government planting a fake news story to protect an ally. Yeah, that would. I'm currently thinking on top of my head, I should have researched that, what constitutional article that would violate. Maybe it wouldn't. Maybe it's so far-fetched that they never thought to make that illegal. It certainly, I would hope, it would be a scandal of epic proportions. But these days, you never know. But Hersh continues, in the words of the intelligence community, I just love that term. In the words of the intelligence community, the agency, there's like not much intelligence in that community. They just name themselves that to make themselves feel better, I think. In the words of the intelligence community, the agency was, quote, to pulse the system in an effort to discount the claim that Biden had ordered the pipeline's destruction. At this point, it must be noted that Chancellor Scholz, whether or not he was alerted of the destruction of the pipeline in advance, still an open question, has clearly been complicit since last fall in support of the Biden administration's cover-up of its operation in the Baltic Sea. Now, whether or not this whole theory is correct, I do think that the German government, and especially Scholz, and I know I have to do this story on the German, on the government, and that I've promised for a long time. But I do think they're complicit. They are complicit by the simple fact that they're not investigating this leak either. Like this explosion, this sabotage. They're kind of investigating it, but they're not like, it's not like Scholz did the thing that Hersh said Biden should have done, right? And had a government announcement where they said we're tasking any available assets, like our intelligence services, the federal police, local police, whatever, Coast Guard, to figure out what the fuck happens, because this was they keep calling it terrorism, but it was an act of war, really. More towards Denmark, because it actually happened in Danish territorial waters. But all right, the Baltic is so, all the countries are so close together. It's mind blowing to me that there was no huge investigation of this. So the only conclusion I can draw from that is that the pipeline blowing up was kind of politically desired for the current German government. Now, and I do believe that, Scholz would fly over there and hash things out with Biden. I don't think the 80 minutes were all about Seymour Hersh's story, and I don't think he's saying that. I'm thinking that probably they were talking about the war in general. And I think there weren't aides like there, because I think there was they did a very candid, probably high level, classified thing where they were just like, this is our theory, this is our strategy in Ukraine. This is what we're doing. And Biden was probably trying to get Scholz to, send more tanks or whatever. And I do find it believable that they also discussed this story and discussed, we need to do something about this. Like, we can't have the press in Germany figure this out and figure out that it was the Americans, and then I'm Scholz right now, and then Scholz is in a situation where the German public will get angry, and he'll be put in a position where he is against American interests, right? Because really, if you just look at this, like, if you don't look at the political parties, it doesn't even matter if it's Scholz or if it's Merkel or whatever. Just geopolitically, Germany just can't. It's like, you could see it under Trump, right? There was a lot of rhetoric in the press, and even with a lot of politicians, that, Trump is so horrible and so bad. But like, if you looked at the actual government, like Merkel and her ministers and everything, and like the foreign policy, they were clearly backing off from that rhetoric and were going, we're still allies, and there are close ties between the US, and they were kind of downplaying the Trump thing. They were kind of like, yeah, he's just one president, right? So it was kind of like the vibe they were trying to spread, right? We are still allies. And kind of the press was going with that as well. They were just like, they weren't saying like it's the Americans. They were saying it's specifically Trump is the problem. And they were actually not drawing any like long-term consequences from that, right? They were basically saying, yeah, Trump's going to be gone at some point, and then we're back to status quo with the Americans, which is a geopolitical necessity, right? You have to remember that, it's not the Cold War anymore. So Germany really is not in a position anymore, or was until this whole thing kicked off last year, was not really in a position where we needed the US to protect us from the Russians, which was kind of I've talked about this on the show a lot of times, which is kind of a dumb thing anyway, because if there's all-out nuclear war, you can't really protect us. And if there's conventional war, the Americans can't protect us either, because you can't defend Germany against an assault from the east, which has been shown in World War II, obviously, and which is if you look at the NATO plans from the Cold War, it's like the same thing, right? They're basically the plan for defense of Germany is to give up like more than half the country, because like the flatlands until you get to the mountains, you can't defend. You can't, the Norddeutsche Tiefebene, like the northern German flatlands, right? Anything until you get to Northern Westphalia and you get like to the hills, you can't defend that. You can't. There's no way. Like, you can't have that many tanks, right? They just drive around you basically and circle you. So there's actually like, there's no reason for this protection, but Germany still isn't very sovereign, right? I mean, when I say these things, people will say, "How well, you're a weird conspiracy theory," like they call them, like Reichsbürger, the people who say that Germany, as the country, the Federal Republic, doesn't exist and it's still like the Kaiserreich or whatever. That's all nonsense, right? But those people always bring up a point which has a basis in reality, right? They say that, their rhetoric is that Germany is still occupied, which is bullshit. But it is true that there's a lot of American soldiers, weapons, even nuclear weapons, still in Germany. There's huge bases. I used to live in Hanover. I used to actually, for a while, when my wife lived in Hamburg, I used to go from Hanover to Hamburg. And if you do that, and if you don't go along the highway, even if you go along the highway, there's a huge area in the middle called the Lüneburg Heath, where there's basically shit all. And there's the biggest military a training area in Europe is right there. It's a huge, if you look on the map, there's huge areas on the map where there's just a red area that you can't go through. There's no roads. Well, there's actually roads, but they're not on the maps, right? It's all fenced off. You can't go through there. There's always huge NATO trainings there every year or 2 years. There are tanks, artillery, planes, everything. So, and there's a huge military presence. I mean, actually, in the Bergen-Belsen, it's actually that's the base. It used to be a concentration camp, actually, or there used to be a concentration camp right next to it. There's still a memorial there. There's a huge army base. There's mostly British military there now, but obviously there's huge American bases, Ramstein, stuff like that. So we can't, we couldn't even, if Germany wanted to oppose the US on anything, let's say Ukraine or this, where we go, basically you just fucking declared war on us. We have huge amounts of American military presence right in our country, right? They could presume, it's, and it's weird. People really don't think about that because, World War II ended, the Americans, the British, the Russians liberated Germany. And that alliance is still very much that's a given for people, right? If there were actually still Russian military bases in Eastern Germany with Russian tanks, hundreds of Russian tanks sitting around, people would lose their shit. But American tanks, British tanks, is fine. I'm not saying what I'm saying here. I'm very careful not to be misunderstood here, right? It's not I'm actually not going into what my actually opinion is on this, because I think it's very, very complicated, and it'd be a very long discussion that I probably can't have on my own, that I'd have to discuss with somebody about whether I think that is a good idea. I'm just saying that's the reality. That's the cold, hard Realpolitik, as Bismarck would say, Realpolitik, geopolitical reality on the ground, is that we kind of tied to the US. So we can't actually fucking, Scholz can't afford to piss off the US very much. So he kind of has to fly over and go, how are we going to solve this? What are we going to do? Now, and how are we going to structure our effort in Ukraine or whatever. Now, I would hope that as an exchange of fucking over the press and kind of making himself and basically the bitch of the US president, he'd extract something in exchange, right? He'd go I want some paper. You fucking blew up our fucking pipeline, and now our energy costs are 3 times what they were. They were 10 times what they were for a while. Our fucking economy is fucked. Our businesses are fucked. I would like some payback for this. Maybe he extracted some favors that the US get off our ass, asking to deliver more tanks to Ukraine. That would be a weak ass exchange, but yeah, maybe he did that. I could think he did that. Maybe that would be plausible to me from what I think of Scholz. That him going, if you want fucking tanks in Ukraine, sell them your own tanks. You got enough. We got problems as it is, and maybe, but as I know these clowns in our current government, he probably he probably just pulled down his pants and bent over at that meeting. But that's all speculation. But according to Hersh, so what happened after this is, so Hersh's theory, let's call it a theory because there's no fucking proof on this. He's got some anonymous sources again, but So apparently, so the New York Times was fed kind of a fake story, this yacht story. Like the Times is usually fed stories from contacts in the government, in the intelligence community. Like how Russiagate came about, how the WMD episode came about, all of this shit. And then apparently the Zeit, the German newspaper, was more skeptical, but they were kind of bum rushed by the Times. They kind of figured out. I want to know how they knew that the Times was going to press with this, because you don't usually, you're in competition. You don't talk to these people. Well, you talk to them, but not about an investigative story that's an exclusive, right? How would like a Times journalist go, like talk to like a colleague in Germany, go, oh, by the way, we've got this. They would probably ask them if they're researching a story in Germany and like some contacts at the site, they would go like, ask them some stories about some questions. But, these are presumably really good journalists. If they're at the Times, like they wouldn't show their hand, right? They wouldn't go like, oh, if the site is also researching this, they know we're going to press and then they can scoop us. Like that's the last thing you want. But apparently somehow the site found out, and that's why they're published as well. Which makes me think that was kind of the plan, the whole, from the beginning. But let's quote. I'm going to quote Hersh on what he says here. So Hersh says the agency, so that's the CIA, the agency did its job, and with the help of German intelligence, concocted and planted stories about an ad hoc off the books, in air quotes, operation that had led to the destruction of the pipelines. The scam led to a March 7th report in the New York Times citing an anonymous American official claiming, so same sourcing as Hersh's stuff, anonymous American official claiming that, quote, new intelligence suggests that a pro-Ukrainian group, end quote, may have been involved in the pipeline's destruction. And an online report the same day in Die Zeit, Germany's most widely read weekly newspaper, stated that German investigative officials had tracked down a chartered luxury sailing yacht, that was known to have set off on September the 6th from the German port at Rostock, past Bornholm Island off the coast of Denmark. The island is a few miles from the area where the pipelines were destroyed on September 26th. The yacht had been rented from Ukrainian owners and manned by a party of 6. So if you're doing this, right, and you're Ukrainian, and this story is so idiotic, and you're like kind of, you don't want this to go back to Ukraine, right? You're not renting a fucking Ukrainian yacht. If you're the Russians, maybe. But like, what the fuck? Just rent some Greek yacht, or what, the German one? Who could the fuck just have your own ship if you're intelligent? I mean, makes so sense. The yacht had been rented from Ukrainian owners and manned by a party of 6: a captain, two divers assistants, and a doctor. 5 were men and 1 a woman. False passports were involved. Holger Stark, author of the Die Zeit report, told me after publication of this report that he had been following the criminal investigation into the yacht and its whereabouts for months. And he and the newspaper decided to rush to publish what they knew upon learning of the New York Times report. He had no contact with German intelligence. So, first of all, how did they know that the Times was going to publish? Then, how did he know he didn't have contact with German intelligence? Maybe he had a source and he didn't know. Who knows? I don't know. So I want to know. So this is something that Hersh doesn't answer. So some question I have. Was Stark lying, or was there actually an investigation 4 months, in air quotes? Like, if there was, what were they actually investigating and why? Like, I would like to know specifics. It's something the site could probably answer. So if it was a legit investigation, a pipeline attack, like if the site knew that this boat was under investigation because people thought that it had blown up the pipeline. Why didn't they go to press earlier? Why did they wait for the Times? Were they so unsure of their sources, of their story? Like, was it that far-fetched? Otherwise, you'd think it's a hugely important story, right? They could go to press earlier, right? Now, it's interesting that the whole thing about the 4 month going on 4 months thing is because, like, these stories specifically came about after Hersh's story. So they looked like, just a clear distraction. That's what I thought. Actually, this didn't occur to me originally. I was talking to somebody else, a fellow journalist, about this, and I was saying, the Seymour Hersh story, and he was saying, yeah, I read that, and then I said, then he said, what do you think about that boat story? And I was like, yeah, that's completely far-fetched. And he was like, yeah, and it's kind of funny how that just appeared after nobody investigated this shit for months, and then as soon as Hersh publishes a thing that is kind of detrimental for the status quo, like detrimental to the establishment, then suddenly this other story appears. So yeah. So I want to know, like, if that investigation was going on, like, wouldn't that disprove that this was a cover-up? I don't know. You'd have to figure out what kind of what they were actually investigating and why. And I would want to know why that side waited, right? So putting on the tinfoil hat, was the whole yacht thing maybe a deep cover thing by the CIA, where they're like, we're doing this, we're setting this up in advance, so that if somebody starts to connect the Navy to this shit, then we have like this story we can feed people. I don't know. That would be like a typical, like, that would be a John le Carré kind of move, when you're like intelligent, or like, Tom Clancy wrote about this shit as well. Like, when you're an intelligence service and you go like, you just hire some people to do this and they don't even know why they're doing it, and then you're like implicating them later. That'll be typical spycraft. Who knows? I have no idea. So many questions. Sadly, there's not enough journalists who actually have access. Like, I can't research this shit. I wouldn't even know where to start, right? And I don't have access to this kind of records and to these sources. But like, there must be some journalists who do. And why are they not doing their fucking jobs? I want to know. Like, why is this site not like? If you read that story, and there's a link in the show notes, Private Citizen of Press, you want to read it. If you speak German, if you read that story, you kind of realize, and Hersh says this as well, that they're not really sure. They're like really skeptical. They have like disclaimers in there. So why didn't they just write more about this? Like, why didn't they explain why they're skeptical? Right? Why don't we learn more about this investigation? Like, how did they learn of the investigation? What did they find out about it? It's just a very plain, relatively short, like, generic story. Like, there's no fucking details in this. Why not? Like, who are they protecting? They're protecting their sources? Then they should say that. Like, this is just like, it's not good journalism. It's just not convincing. It's not only the story's not convincing, but like the way this came about is also not convincing, which is kind of why I'm siding with Hersh on this, because what he says just seems to make more sense to me, even though it's a conspiracy theory. But, intelligence services involved, it might actually be a conspiracy. Anyway, Hersh keeps going on about these stories and says the two publications included cautions in their stories, noting that, as the Times put it, quote, there was much they did not know. New information was, however, also said to have given officials, quote, increased optimism that a firm conclusion about the perpetrators would be reached, but it would take a long time. Why? According to various senior officials in Washington and Germany. Like, why? The message was that the press and the public should stop asking questions and let the investigators unravel the truth, which of course would never come. The experienced Stark, who heads the site's investigative unit, went a step further. Sorry, this whole German's throwing me up. I'm going to go back into my German accent. Went a step further and noted that there were some quote in international security services, end quote, who had not excluded the possibility. So he had contacted some intelligence services, apparently, were not excluded the possibility that the odd story, quote, was a false flag operation. Indeed it was, says Hersh. So why would that take time? Right? With like any other investigation, like when there's like a fucking, as they like to call it, cyber attack, it's like immediately they're like, oh, it was the Russians. It's the North Koreans. Like we figured this out. Like what fucking takes time about this investigation? Like, it seems to me either you have concrete evidence linking these people somehow with money, or, I don't know, where they, used to work or whatever. Like the same kind of shit Bellingcat does, right? I was also very quiet on this, by the way. Either you have links or you don't have links. And either these are convincing or they're not. I don't know how time's going to change that. Like, what's time going to... If anything, it's going to obscure, like, leads and whatever. Like any detective knows, the more time goes by, the harder it actually gets to investigate stuff like this. Anyway, Hersh says it was a total fabrication by American intelligence that was passed along to the Germans and aimed at discrediting your story, I was told by a source within the American intelligence community. The disinformation professionals inside the CIA understand that a propaganda gambit can only work if those on the receiving end are desperate for a story that can diminish or displace an unwanted truth. And the truth in question is that President Joe Biden authorized the destruction of the pipelines and will have a difficult time explaining away his action as Germany and Western European neighbors suffer as businesses are shuttered amid high day-to-day energy costs. I think that makes complete sense to me. I mean, I would like to, I'm going to mention feedback here in a bit, but like I would like you to again write in and tell me if that makes sense to you. But like, this makes complete sense to me, right? So the reason this bullshit story works is because the press largely doesn't want to investigate this. Because, unlike Biden, who doesn't want to investigate it because he knows that he did it, the press is afraid that they might find out that Biden did it. And that would put the German government in a very, very precarious situation. For the reasons I mentioned. Germany is kind of joined at the hip to American foreign policy, and has always been. I'm not saying at Germany, our politicians follow the American lines on everything. A good example is Gerhard Schröder, who famously, after Germany getting involved in the war in Afghanistan, kind of against its constitution, which, the interpretation of that has since changed, but I'm a very strong believer in the fact that, Germany shall never be involved in in an offensive war means that was an illegal action, because I think that was an offensive. It's a war. Going to Afghanistan, shooting at people is an offensive war. I don't know, but yeah, they lawyer their way around that. But famously, Gerhard Schröder, for populist reasons, because it was not very popular with the population. But sometimes populist reasons can be good, right? Because I think the population had a good reason here. Like, the German population didn't believe the lies from the US intelligence community that the American press just parroted, but all the weapons of mass destruction about that bullshit. And the German population, the citizens had enough. They're like, we don't want to involve in this fucking war. So Schröder went no, we're not going to Iraq. And, that works. Like, we don't have to follow everything, every line the American government sets basically in foreign policy. But we also can't like really go against them. You know, since the Federal Republic of Germany existed, that has never happened. And, you know, there could be several reasons for that. I think people in Germany tend to assume this is because, you know, we're just aligned with the Americans. You know, after World War II, we got like lots of our culture was influenced by the US, and we're just mentally in line with the US. But that is actually not the reason. I think, you know, the reason is just realpolitik, geopolitical, you know, necessities. And you kind of could see that during Trump, because there was a very peculiar situation here when Trump was US president, where the press, and I talked about this on the show a lot, went on about like how bad Trump is and parroted the US press all the time, which I found weird, because like why do we actually care, right? Especially if it's not foreign policy. Why do we care what Trump does, like in domestic policy in the US? Like, we have our own problems. Why the fuck do we care? But it was also very like, there was a very like schizophrenic reaction by the press and in extension that by the public here in Germany, where like basically we were saying Trump is an idiot and a moron and like the worst person to run a country since Hitler. But like we still held very fast to like our alliance with the US. Like nobody went like, okay, so they literally did stories in the German press where they're like basically alleging, there were like commentaries, political commentaries, where people saying Trump's a madman, he will start World War III, basically. The logical conclusion would be, well, now we have all these soldiers and weapon systems controlled by this madman in our own country. If we were actually concerned about that, you know, we would try to change that. Like, I mean, no matter how realistic it is to get like these bases disbanded and get these soldiers out, whatever, we'd at least try. And the funny thing is, Trump was at the time pulling soldiers from overseas. So it wouldn't have actually been that unbelievable maybe for Trump to say, yeah, I don't want to pay for all these bases. That's bullshit. Like, you know, the US taxpayers are paying for like fucking bases in Germany. We don't want that. Like, let's pull these out. Why are we in Germany? Right? So that would actually have probably worked. Maybe. I don't know. I have no idea. But like that wasn't even on the table, which tells you that this whole idea that we are so closely allied with the US because we agree with them so much is bullshit. We're allied with them because we have really no other choice. Like, we could, like, if a US president was open to it, we could probably reverse this situation and like kind of make ourselves more separate from the US. But like, if the US doesn't want that, like if the government doesn't want that, there's like no chance like we can't like I don't know. I'm not a military expert. I wasn't in the military. I'm just a historian and I haven't researched this. But I would suspect that the fighting strength of the allied NATO forces, like the US and British forces in Germany, probably rivals, if not eclipses, that of the Bundeswehr. Like, if there was actually gonna be a fight, I think we would lose. Which was kind of like, that was the point of the setup after the Second World War. Of course, it's been wound down massively. So I don't know. But on the other hand, the Bundeswehr has been massively wound down over the last 20 years, as we recently learned. When the head of the when this whole situation in Ukraine kicked off, the head of the Bundeswehr said, well, we're not ready for anything. You know, people were saying, oh, we need to I think he actually stepped down, or he was made to step down because people were saying, yeah, we need to be ready to help Ukraine. And that the head inspector of the Bundeswehr actually said, no, we are not ready for anything because you kind of cut our funding for the last 20 years and we're fucked. And I've been telling you this, and my predecessors have been telling you this for 10 years, that we can't, like, if push comes to shove, we can't do fucking anything. So I think that's like the power situation we're operating under here. But then, that's really, that was really high level now. To wrap this up, again, I don't think Hersh's sources are satisfactory. But neither are the ones from the other side. I think his story, both the initial story and his idea that this is a cover-up, are believable. I think they are mostly, well, they make sense, and then they are plausible because there's the alternative theories are just so much worse. The way his story came about and the way the other stories came about, his it just sounds like better journalism, even with the sourcing, like his story. Like I have so many questions about that Times, the Zeit, and also the Times story probably. It just, like, Hersh quotes, so one of the guys who wrote the New York Times story was on the Daily after the story was published, so the New York Times podcast, and Hersh quotes that as being like revealing. I don't see he has like a transcript. I don't think it's very revealing. But I listened to the podcast episode and I listened to the guy, and he doesn't sound very sure about the story, right? He doesn't inspire confidence. And then there was also actually a huge red flag because actually Hersh has this in the transcript as well. This reporter is called Julian Barnes, and he says, so my colleagues Adam Goldman and I started asking a different question, blah blah blah. Now Adam Entous, I don't know, I forgot how he pronounced it, Entous, I think, is one of the main guys who fucked up the whole Russiagate thing. Like, he's if you read Taibbi's deconstruction of the whole Russiagate thing, and I did an episode on this as well. He and Too's turns up several times. He wrote a lot of stories that were very far-fetched on Russiagate, so that's already immediately a red flag. But this guy just doesn't sound convincing on the podcast. And you can read both of these stories are not very, they're not very, if you read them, they don't feel like they're written with authority and self-confidence. They read like they're written by journalists who have some sources, who want to write a story and who are covering their ass. So I don't want to even say that these journalists knew that there were fed stories by the intelligence services, because they probably didn't. Because really, if you do this well, if you're the CIA, it works better if the journalists don't know. But I think it's a case of they want to believe. As I said, it's just like these people don't want. These are journalists whose understanding, and I've talked about this on the show a lot as well, understanding of how to do journalism is very different from mine. I believe I'm a very old school journalist, even though I've only been doing this job for about just over 10 years. But I'm very old school, and I believe that you go where the story takes you, even if it's uncomfortable. And it's not the job of the journalist to figure out if the story you're writing hurts the German government or the German relations to the US. I might be personally of the opinion that the US being an ally with Germany is important and needs to stay that way. I don't even know if I'm of that opinion, but let's assume I'm of that opinion. And I would not want to hurt this relationship. Still, as a journalist, I believe it is my job to tell the things that I see, how I see them. Right? So if I get a story and I think it's important and the outcome of this story will jeopardize this alliance, I still think it's my job as a journalist to tell the story. Because it's not my job to protect the interests of the government. Quite the opposite. Right? I would probably err on the side of, if I didn't know, like if I had a story like this and I was on the fence of publishing it, because of the sourcing or whatever, I had my doubts. The story being detrimental to the government, to the people in power, and to the status quo, and the interests of powerful people would make me want to publish the story even if I wasn't sure, rather than the other way around. Because I see that as a job of a journalist, to fight the powers that be. Because, I mean, the powers that be are the powers that be because they have a lot of power. They have money, they have power, they have influence. And if you look at history, they will largely, short of very, very disgusting and bloody and painful events, like wars and revolutions, where lots of people die, and lots of people lose their livelihood and that kind of thing. Short of these like extraordinary events, these powerful people will generally hold on to their power. And it is generally not good for the rest of the population. So, that's, to me, the job of a journalist, right? And that's why some people these days think it's the job of an activist to fight that. And I don't think so, because like I find that very dangerous. Like, I'm not saying people shouldn't be activists, but if you're an activist, you do something, you do exactly this, what these journalists are doing, right? You have a conviction, and so you have a viewpoint, and you subordinate everything to this viewpoint. That's what being an activist is about. Being a journalist is about really not having, everybody has a viewpoint, but trying to not have a viewpoint, like to bring this old school. This is why I like reading Matt Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald. It has nothing to do with the actual political opinion. They have expressed and they have shown a willingness to an understanding of journalism that is this old school understanding that, your job is to dredge up stuff that people don't want to, that people want to keep hidden, and to publish that, no matter the consequences. It's society sorts that out. It's not your job to worry about the consequences as a journalist. It's not your job to worry about, if the source perpetrated a crime by getting you the material. It's not your job to think about if you break the law by publishing the material. Your job is to get the material out there. And I used to be very specific about the way you do that as a journalist, right? I used to, not on this show, but if you'd listen to my Linux podcast from years back, me and Dan, we would often talk about political things on the side. We'd talk about everything. It was like being in a pub with a mate, right? We talked about Linux, but we also talked about WikiLeaks and fucking Julian Assange. And I was always against, like, Dan was much more for the kind of WikiLeaks, as far as I remember his stance at the time, for the way of just getting the information out. And I was very cautious always. I was very new to journalism at that time. And I was like sticking by the book. And I was like, no, there are rules and you have to, protect the people that are in the material. And it's just like there's a reason that there's kind of a profession, right? There's a journalist and they have certain rules, like we have the codex, the press codex in Germany, that you adhere to, and traditions and kind of thing. And that was back at in that time, I still believed in the system. I still believed the system worked. Now, I think it's been shown over the last 2 years that this system has failed, that journalists have not done their job. And that's why now, these days, I'm like, I don't even care. I'm like, if it's WikiLeaks style, if some people get hurt by releasing that information, so be it. These days, I think it's so rare that this information actually gets out and gets to people. And journalists, when they kind of get this information, in general, do such a bad job of extracting the actual, for lack of a better word, truth, and getting it to the people, that sometimes just leaking it is just better. Because journalists are fucking it up so much. Basically, the people will have to do it themselves. Like, they have to do their own job, and because journalists have been so bad at it, and that has downsides. There might be some intelligence operatives or whatever, or some, if you leak like Hillary's emails, whatever, there's like some people that get mixed up in there, that get their name ruined, that kind of, just because of there's something completely else in that email, like maybe some adult, I don't know what was in those emails. I don't give a damn. But like, just theoretically, right? That some people might have negative consequences that really did not deserve that, because they just got caught up. And I would generally, like, in a perfect world, I would try to avoid this, which is why I used to be for, journalists have to look at this stuff and they have to redact things that really don't belong to the story. But journalists have done such a piss poor job at that I think that has sailed. That ship has sailed. I think we as journalists, we can't go and say, well, it's just not cricket to release the information. I think we've as a profession in the last 10, 20 years, we've fucked up so badly that we really can't be the arbiters of that anymore. But that was also completely off topic here, but I think that's important, because we're basically talking about journalism here, right? It's a set to me. I mean, I write on Substack, and I do, my slogan is new media, new rules. So I like underdogs, and I like people stirring up the system. But if I look at the last 2 years, it's extremely sad as a journalist that I've found these great investigative stories, and they're almost all on Substack or like on some random podcast, right? None of this shit is like in established newspapers, in established media, in the legacy media, as Taibbi likes to call it. And it's turning out to be the legacy media. Like that is really becoming true. Because if some guy, and Hersh is not some random guy, but if some guy on Substack is doing a better job than your fucking 80 people newsroom, what the hell are you doing? Anyway, we're gonna have to get to the feedback, because I have some direct feedback from the previous episode that pertains to this episode. So we should talk about that. Speaking of feedback, you can go to privatecitizen.press and comment right in the show notes now. There's like a link, start a discussion, or there's already a discussion there, and you can jump in. You might have to create a forum account if you don't have one, but it's very quick, and it's a very friendly forum. So I would encourage you to do so, and you can do it anonymously. Of course, me as the admin, I'll see your email, whatever, but I'll treat that as I would treat any other sources, right? I'm not gonna I have to comply with German law, of course, So if you post some stuff that's illegal in Germany, you'll have to take that off. But like, if the police comes and says, we want to know who this guy is, I'm gonna invoke my press credentials on that, and I would go to jail for that. I think that would be very painful, but it would also be a good story. I'd be turning that into a book, Anyway, so you can do that, or you can, write me an email, anonymous contact, a Dropbox, anything, links, all the information in the show notes. Private Citizen Press. Now, if you write on the forum, like Galtaran commented on the previous episode and said this, it seems to me that you have called a spade by talking about an act of war. How else could it be that the intelligence community seems to continue making a big fuss about this by pimping an alternative explanation? And he links to another Substack, unsurprisingly. This is Ugripius, who has a story from Reuters. Last week, Danish authorities said a tubular object protruding around 40 centimeters from the seabed and 10 centimeters in diameter had been found during an inspection of the last remaining intact pipeline by Swiss-based operator Nord Stream 2 AG. With a view to further clarifying the nature of the object, Danish authorities have decided to salvage the object with assistance from the Danish defense. That's the something Forsvares, I think it is. The country's energy agency said in a statement on Thursday. The Danish energy agency has in that this is in Danish territorial waters, right? So that's why it's the Danes. The Danish energy agency. Actually, I have to Google that. Let's see what they're called. Danish energy agency. Okay, they gotta be on Wikipedia. Energistyrelsen. Energistyrelsen. That's how you pronounce it if you're German. And Energistyrelsen. But if it's Danish, it's probably Energistyrelsen. Danish is kind of like reading stuff backwards. Gotta be careful. I'm gonna be in Copenhagen soon for a Sabaton concert. They won't be liking this. So Danish energy agency Energistyrelsen has, in that context, invited the owner of the pipeline, Nord Stream 2 AG, to participate in the operation. It said, adding it was awaiting a response from the operator. The German headlines, of course, the Russians. In Der Spiegel. Der Spiegel reports that the Danes are saying it could be a smoke buoy, which is interesting because Seymour Hersh's original report on how America took out the Nord Stream pipeline featured a sonar buoy allegedly dropped to trigger the pipeline charges. Naturally, I have no idea whether such a buoy would be so small, and it seems improbable that it would have ended up directly adjacent to the intact Nord Stream 2 pipe. Yeah, I think so. Perhaps this is all part of a publicity operation to disarm this aspect of the sabotage story. At any rate, timing is odd, for this latest report comes 2 days after Seymour Hersh's follow-up piece on the origins of the sailboat saboteur account of the attack. This, you'll recall, is the story that appeared simultaneously in major American and German media directly after the early March meeting between German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and US President Joe Biden in Washington. Hersh seems to confirm widespread suspicions about how that report originated. We talked about that. What I find interesting, so if you look at this, so I'm writing a novel about submarines. I love the ocean. I've been a fan of Sequest ever since that aired originally on TV. I love submarines. I love the sea. I'm not really a diver, but I love I'm not really with tanks and shit, but I love shallow diving and shit. I've been wearing a diver's watch for 10 years. I just love the ocean. Now, if you look at this story from Reuters, links in the show notes, Private Citizen Press, they have a picture of this thing, and it's presumably it's this tubular object, which is presumably a buoy, that is in front of the pipeline. I assume the thing in the background is the pipeline. Now, the thing that immediately, so it looks like it's stuck fast to the ocean floor, maybe 10, 20, 30 centimeters from the pipeline. And the thing that immediately occurs to me is that the pipeline is relatively free of marine growth, like organisms, shit. This object is like covered in it. So either it is some material that is more porous or like, more liable to attract growth than the pipeline, which I think is concrete. I think that's a concrete cover. So maybe this is plastic or metal. I don't know. But from the first look, it looks like it's been there longer than the pipeline. It's been there a long time. I don't know. That, like, if that was dropped in the attack, which is now September, October, November, December, January, February, March. It's like half a year. I don't know. That looks like it's been there longer than half a year. I'm not an expert on this, but this looks like another false flag, to be honest. I'll be watching the story. I'll be interested to see what the Danes discover. Like, what would that be? Like, so that's the intact pipeline. It's the one that didn't blow up. Like, would that be like an explosive charge that didn't explode? Like, I mean, it's not going to be the sonar buoy, because the whole point of that is like you drop that miles and miles and miles from where the actual explosion would be, right? Because sonar travels very far in the water. I mean, you can, like, you drop a sonar buoy in the ocean, you can, like, with the equipment on a submarine, you can detect that like hundreds of kilometers away. I talked about the Gloma, used Gloma Explorer when the Americans salvaged or tried to salvage this Russian submarine in the Cold War. The Russians didn't know where the submarine was. The Americans knew because they had like antenna, like ultra low frequency, like antenna, like sonar listening devices, basically. Around half the, like, one was like fucking in Canada, I think, and the other one was like in Hawaii or something, like, and then there was another one on like the other side of the planet, and they triangulated where the submarine exploded, like that explosion sound, which underwater is really loud, but it's like not that, like, you can track something like this around half the planet. So you wouldn't drop that thing right next to that wouldn't, like, what is that? Like, did they blow this pipeline up by dropping something from a plane and this just didn't explode? Like, what's that supposed to be? Like, I don't. Yeah, this is all bullshit. Anyway, I would like to thank Galtarin for linking me to this story. Very interesting. I would like to know, what do you think? If you're listening to this, if you have any commentary on this. So far, we didn't have any live commentary on Twitch tonight. But, you go to Private Citizen Press, let me know. Sign up to the forum if you want to. If you don't, just send me an email, whatever. And you'll become a producer on the show. There's also another way to become a producer. And that is by supporting me on Patreon. If you like this show, if you think I should continue doing it, and you got some money to spare, doesn't really matter how much, please support me on Patreon. It would help a lot. And you'll get a credit on the show. I've got like these tiers that kind of, structured after Hollywood producer titles, because I kind of want to be this, like the new Game of Thrones show or something, where it's like two actors and then there's like 2 minutes of producers on, or like Star Trek Picard, where it's like they like credit, it's like the original Star Trek where they like credit 3 actors and then the intro is over, And then Star Trek Picard, they credit like 3 actors, and instead of the intro being over, there's like 3 minutes more intro, but it's all producers. That's kind of like how this works. So thanks to my showrunner, Sorgol Taran, executive producers, I11G, or Lilk, I have no idea, Butterbeans, Jaroslav Lichtblau, Rizal, and Sandman616. Supervising producers, Avis, Bennett Piata, Dave, IKN, Jackie Plage, Jonathan M. Hitai, Krunkle, Michael Mullen Jensen, Robert Forster, and Tobias Weber. Or Tobias Weber, who the fuck knows? Producers, Andrew Davidson, Astral C, Cam, Captain Eckert, David Potter, Dirk Didi, Fadi Mansour, Florian Pigorsch, Joe Poser, Michael Small, sorry, Florian, Michael Small, Mika, Mr. Amish, Rick Bragg, RJ Tracy. Funny thing, in school, because Fabian was kind of a rare name when I grew up. It's not these days anymore, but like they always used to call me Florian. And I met very many Florians in my time that always said they always used to call them Fabian. So we have kind of a bond. Anyway, right. Associate producers, Barry Williams, D, Jonathan Johansson, Kaisius, Ricky M, Steve Hose, and Vlad. Thanks to all of you. You make this show possible, and I appreciate that very much. And I also have to thank Bytemark at bytemark.co.uk. They're providing the servers that host these audio files, so they're hosting the bandwidth for free, and I couldn't do the show without them either, so thanks to Bytemark as well. And with that, I'm out of here. I'm signing off. The theme song for this show, as every time, but I like to give credit where credit's due, is called Acoustical Roots by Raoul Kabzali. I didn't have to do this, but I like to do that. I like to give credit. And then I'm going to play us out with a song by Big Girl, who's rapidly becoming a favorite artist on Epidemic Sound. Big Girl with the song Ready to See My Baby, which is kind of new. It's a single she released recently. I really like Big Girl, so we're going to listen to that. And that's it for me. I might be back tomorrow. I will try. And yeah, until then, aim to misbehave.
Fight this
Microphone isn't on. That song was over quicker than I thought. Your tarot card for the day. What is that? The Knight. The Knight of Spades. Whatever that means. Thanks for watching, everybody. Yeah, thanks for watching. We can turn this off. Where is it? Yeah, we can turn that off now. I'm gonna be out of here in a hot second. Need to finish this. Get this podcast out, and then I need to do a hell of a lot of more work tonight. Still have a shitload to do. I'm just trying to figure out. So I was watching Khalifa play Cyberpunk before I started this. I'm gonna see if she's still at it. So that's great. So we'll be visiting Khalifa now. I'll be kicking over there if that's okay with you, because I'll have to do some more work. So stay on board, please. You know, Khalifa's cool. She's one of my favorite streamers, and I'm gonna visit her again very soon in Copenhagen. So yeah, thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you have a nice rest of your evening, and I hope you jump over to Khalifa with me, and yeah, see you soon. Possibly tomorrow. Again, I will try, but I can't promise.